So I'm just using a palette pad. I've switched from paper plates to palette pad because I'm trying to put less styrofoam into the environment. So here's some quinacridone nickel azo gold. And with the golden products, you don't need much paint on your palette because they're so highly pigmented. And here's some Payne's Gray, which in golden, and the fluid golden is bluish. It's like a denim color. I have here raw umber. Can't see the label on it anymore. These paints are well traveled. And I'm working on an 11 by 14. And I'm working on that size because it fits into the screen. So that was red oxide. This is yellow ochre. So I happen to like the combination of yellow ochre and quinacridone nickel azo gold. And then Titan buff, which is an off-white. So, and then in order to stretch my paints, I like to add some matte medium to them. Your mediums are much less expensive than your paints, and you can add as much as an equal amount to these paints without making them too transparent. So let it go ahead and stretch your paint a little bit, and you'll spend a little less money on paint and have money for more colors. So, and I had previously put it into this cup, which is a little easier than pouring out of the big bottle. And then I'll just mix it up with a palette knife, which I should rinse off or wipe off between colors. Just polluted my Titan buff, but that's okay. There's enough of it there. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to start with is an ampersand panel. It's a gesso board. It's pre-primed. I don't have to do anything else to this. It's already primed with gesso. And my new favorite brush is this silver golden Taklon quill. I always like the golden Taklon fibers. But the reason I like this one is I can push harder and I can get a really wide stroke, or I can sort of do this and I can get a narrower stroke. So I'm really lazy about changing brushes, and this one kind of acts like 2-in-1. It's kind of, I can make it act like a flat or a round. So I'm just going to go ahead and do what I call activating the white space. And I like to do that with the quinacridone nickel azo gold because I can get this variation of color from yellow to orange in it. But I also like to put in a little bit of raw umber, and I do that because this quinacridone nickel azo gold gets really fiery orange, and the little bit of raw umber just settles it down a little bit. The one thing about working on these boards is it does take longer to dry than a canvas does with your acrylic paint. And that can be an advantage if you like changing things a lot or need more working thinking time. For me, it's generally a disadvantage because I like working quickly, but I'm going to go ahead and put this aside and give it a few minutes to dry. And then I'm going to do that same thing on a sheet of watercolor paper. And I'm going to use the same colors. Now this has the raw umber in it now. And I'm on the watercolor paper, I'm using a pretty wet brush because I want this to be light and transparent. Maybe I'll go ahead and put some yellow ochre in here. What the yellow ochre does is it makes the quinacridone nickel azo gold a little more opaque. And I don't care what brush strokes I'm seeing or what this looks like, because I know that this is all going to be covered up with something else. This is just getting away the fear of the white space. I can add a little bit of Payne's gray to it if I want. And that makes a real vintagey sort of green brown color. Okay, and then I need that to dry as well. And my third piece, I'm actually going to add tissue paper to this piece. And as you can see, I started it. And with the tissue paper, I just cleaned my brush and hit my phone. So with the tissue paper, I put that down with the matte medium. The matte medium acts as a glue. All of your mediums will act as a glue. They all dry clear. If it says medium, it's going to dry clear. Your mattes dry a little bit cloudy, kind of like the look of non-glare glass when you do a picture frame. So it's clear, but there's a little bit of cloud to it because of the matting agent. You can also get fluid matte medium, which is more fluid than this. This is fluid. And you can get super matte medium, which is way more matte and it is more cloudy. It says right on the bottle that this is translucent, and it's called translucent because of that matting agent. Low gloss, and it's an acrylic extender for your paint. But I'm going to be using it as a glue here. We've already used it to extend the paint. So this is Spectra Art Tissue. It's a tissue that you buy in the art supply store. It's a little heavier and a little bit more versatile than your gift wrap tissue. It doesn't have that waxed backing on it. And I'm wrinkling it as I put it down. I'm putting the medium on the painting and I'm putting the medium over the tissue paper. And there's a little color in this because I didn't have my brush completely clean. I try to get rid of the really straight edges and make a torn look, because if all the edges are organic, it blends better on the canvas. And you can see where it overlaps, it makes white marks, and where it doesn't overlap, it just makes the painting more translucent. And one of the reasons I'm showing you this is because I want to show you eventually that you can use the cheesecloth over other textures or in addition to other textures. So you can paint this as you go. I prefer not to. I prefer just to get it down and then start thinking about it. But it's also a good way on paintings where you have areas that you don't like them. You can go ahead and put the tissue paper over those areas as opposed to gessoing and just build some more texture. You want to make sure you don't have any bubbles coming up. So I'm pushing hard with the brush as I put this down. Because if there's a spot where you don't have medium underneath it, that'll tear eventually. And I'm just putting this below the horizon line on this painting because I've got some plans for what's going to happen up by the horizon line. So that's how the tissue I don't really like when it gets too straight of lines like that, but that's okay. And there's going to get cheesecloth on this too. So I can maybe cover some of those up when I get the cheesecloth, but it subdues what's behind it. You can still see some of it. And you can put more than one layer on this. And you can also use gift wrap tissue with designs on it, or napkins with designs on it. I'm going to put that aside to dry. And I'm going to bring this one back, which still isn't totally dry, which is, I'm in the basement, so it might be more humid down here. But I'm going to go ahead and put some cheesecloth down on this for texture. So I love cheesecloth as a texture, but I don't want people to walk up to my painting and say, oh, look, she used cheesecloth. I want them to walk up and say, oh, look at all that texture. How did she do that? And then say, oh, I think they used cheesecloth. So I've got a big chunk of cheesecloth here, and you want to make sure that you use cotton cheesecloth. The reason for that is I like pulling it apart and making the holes uneven so it doesn't look like gauze or cheesecloth. And you cannot do that with the polyester. It's also way more difficult to get the polyester to stick down. So you can buy cheesecloth. You can buy it in the paint department, like at Home Depot. You can buy it on the sewing wall of like Joann's. I don't know what sewers use it for, but on the Notions wall, they usually have cheesecloth. Michael's, I sometimes find it back in the embroidery department. And you can buy it in the kitchen department, but that's where it usually ends up being polyester. If you buy it in the kitchen department of like Kroger's, to where they use it for canning, a lot of times that one will be polyester. You can also use gauze, sometimes, bandages, but I've run into the place where the bandages are also polyester, but the cotton just, it drinks the medium a little bit better and it makes things stay down better. So I'm doing what I call torturing the cheesecloth. Now I want to pull strings out. I love the strings they make when you just let them fall naturally on your canvas. They make really organic shapes there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put this down randomly. It doesn't matter where the first piece goes. And I'm not going to cover this whole thing with cheesecloth, but I'm going to put more than one piece down. One of the reasons I really like working on these boards, I like this hard surface. I feel like I can build a lot of texture on them, and they're really sturdy, and I don't have to worry about later on the canvas gets flexed somehow and my textures start popping off. And also, if I'm doing any writing with it, as like I mentioned, I do calligraphy. So I do a lot of writing in my paintings. And if I do any writing, I'm writing on a firm surface as opposed to the flexible surface of the canvas. And then you just paint the sides of them, just like the canvas, and they're finished. But there's just a solid feel about the finished piece that I really like. So I'm just putting the medium on top of this, and that will hold it down. The cotton wicks it down so that it goes through and onto the board. And because it's all acrylic, and you can paint right over this medium, you don't need to worry about getting it, keeping it right on the cheesecloth. Okay, so there's the first piece of cheesecloth. Now I want to put another one down. And you also kind of want to make sure it comes like folded 4 times over. So you just want to make sure you just get the one layer. Otherwise it gets kind of chunky on you. Now I can put this down way up here. Then I've got two separate pieces and they become islands floating around. They're elements. There are going to be elements within your painting. They suck up a lot of paint, so they tend to be darker elements. So they tend to be focal points. And if I put it up here, they don't relate at all to each other. And I end up with just like dark floating islands on my painting, which become a problem compositionally. So you want them to either actually join together like this, or you want them to kind of look like a puzzle piece that's going to fit in there if they get closer. You want the two to reflect each other. In this case, I've got some strings up here. You just barely see them on camera. And I'm going to try to hook string into strings. Okay, I'm going to take some of this out of here. Just going to give me some nice strings. Okay, so I've got my overlapping strings. So this is now coming down the right-hand side. And I want to cut my corner off up here. So I'm going to try to pull some strings out so they're reaching up into the corner. So visually, when I get more paint on here, I'm not cutting the corner off. So see if I can get the cheesecloth to sort of, doesn't have to actually be in the corner, but it needs to reach for the corner to be part of the composition. There, I did get a couple strings. And a lot better when I get them painted. If I put the cheesecloth there, like where my brush is, then the painting has no use for this corner. It might as well not be there. So it's cut off visually. If I take and pull strings, a piece of ribbon here to illustrate it so I can do it. So if I pull strings out of that cheesecloth and they're reaching into the corner, now my eye includes that corner when I look at the whole thing. Does that make sense? You need to be careful of particularly when you've got a texture that you know is going to be darker when you paint it, of cutting areas off. And that's why I like the cheesecloth so much, because I can use those strings for that. I'm using the matte medium. Okay, I'm going to put some more down here. So this is what I mean, where it's folded over in like fourths. So I'm just going to pull that piece off. And I chop it. I don't try to cut it carefully. It does have a selvage edge, which I've got here. I'm going to try to cut that off. So this is one I'm not actually going to attach it to this piece over here. I'm going to put it so that the curve of this reflects the curve of this. And composition with texture is super, super important because you can lose your painting and the texture really easily. Yeah, it's a little hard to see. Maybe should have put a darker color down first. And you can paint on your cheesecloth. Doesn't have to be totally dry. I paint as soon as it's dry enough and glued down enough that it's not going to move on me. I'll start painting it. Like the first stuff I put down is almost dry enough to paint on now, but I'm going to go ahead and do some cheesecloth on something else. But you can see I've got kind of a curve going on here with the cheesecloth, and it's reaching up into this area, and this is reaching into this area. So this area, it's reaching here and it's reaching here, and this area is still included within the painting. I'm not losing it because there's no cheesecloth up there, and they're sort of reaching for each other. So that makes it part of it, if that makes sense. Okay, on the paper, and this works better on paper than canvas, we're going to put the cheesecloth down so it leaves a mark on the paper, but we're not going to actually leave the cheesecloth down on the paper. And for those of you that are calligraphers, this is a good thing because then you can write over it. So I'm going to get a piece, again, a chunk of my cheesecloth. I'm going to get a pretty good sized piece here. And I'm going to torture it pretty good. And this works better with like a dark color over a light color, particularly with these colors, which are transparent, most of them. So I'm going to go ahead and put some Payne's Gray down, but I want to put it down like a wash. I want it to be pretty juicy wet. And then I'm going to take the cheesecloth and I'm going to push it down into that wash. And then I'm going to take some more Payne's Gray wash and go over the top of it. And this is one that's always a little tricky. Sometimes it works really, really good, and other times it works like not at all. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that this is a day when it's going to work. I'm going to wipe a little bit of that Payne's Gray that's outside the cheesecloth off, or blend it in a little bit with the background so it gives my cheesecloth area a place to shine. I'm feeling nervous about this, so I'm going to go ahead and put an extra amount of Payne's Gray on here. Okay, and I'm going to put that aside, and I need to let it dry. It's tricky. I need to let it dry long enough so it's going to imprint, but not so long that the paint is going to glue it down. So usually about 10 minutes will do it. So then I'm going to go back to my tissue paper one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put cheesecloth directly over the top of this tissue. And I'm going to put the cheesecloth along the horizon line here and let it define the horizon line. So I want some of my strings to come down, and that'll pull the tissue into the horizon line visually. And then I want some little lines going up to pull the top in as well, since I don't have any tissue at the top. If you don't have any matte medium, the other medium you could use to put this down would be like soft gel. You don't want to use any of the heavy gels because they obliterate the texture because they're too heavy. Sometimes you can thin them out enough to use, but it just makes life a little harder. But soft gel doesn't have any texture of its own, so that's good to use if you don't have the fluid around. I prefer using the matte as opposed to the gloss because the matte is easier to paint over with thin paint, and I like using thin, transparent layers of paint when I'm painting. I don't so much like using thicker paint. So I'm going to pull these strings down. I think I'm going to use a second piece to pull strings up. And I'm going to separate some of these strings down here and make them look really organic. And then the same thing is take my medium and go over the top of it. Here again, here's that bottle. This is the bottle medium that I'm using, the matte medium by Golden. You can use medium if you want. If you need to go cheap, medium's the place to do it. Or gesso. I wouldn't go as cheap as Mod Podge. Mod Podge is a acrylic medium that acts pretty much the same as medium. But I know from experience that it yellows after a couple years and can crack. But Liquitex or Liquitex Basics, those work really well, as does Golden. Golden's strength in the mediums is the different types, like they've got matte medium and fluid matte medium and super matte medium. Liquitex doesn't have all those different matte mediums. Liquitex doesn't, to my knowledge, doesn't have a soft gel medium. So it that's where Golden is stronger in their variety of mediums. But I don't think there's all that much difference in the product. All right, this is one where I'm trying to separate the layers. I just wanted a little piece over here to complete the horizon line. I'm going to pull those strings out. I'm going to cut that off. Okay, and then I'm going to try to get some little piece, just a couple little pieces going with some strings going up. So I've got a piece going up here and a piece going up here. So I'm going to try to kind of attach them to those. But I want the strings going out too, so that they're, otherwise they become a dark blob in my painting. The strings are really important on the cheesecloth. Otherwise you get this blobby island that's next to impossible to deal with. That might be enough. Put one more little piece down. You have to do this for a while and practice it for a while and have some failures and some successes with it, so that you visualize, you know, the composition as you're putting it down. It's painting with texture is sort of a whole animal of its own. It's just you have to understand how the textures take the paint. So once you get them down, you can sort of visualize what's going to happen. So I'm going to let that go for now and let that dry a little bit. And I'm going to check on this one. So I'm going to pick up the corner and see if it's, yeah, it's printing. So you see, you get a print just like, now I've had it too juicy up there, but you get a print just like the cheesecloth is still laying there, but it's smooth with the painting. So if I was going to do calligraphy on this paper, I could have that print. And this works with watercolors too, for those of you who work in more medias. The watercolor is a little bit easier because you can leave it sit and not worry about it gluing itself down. But I really have fallen in love with this technique. And I also use it in backgrounds in books, on book pages, and it gives me an area to write into. So now I'm going to go back to this and I'm going to start painting on it. And I'm going to start with my Payne's Gray. And I'm keeping my paints, again, just fairly watery. Well, that's a little too watery for the board. But see how that cheesecloth really grabs the color. Now I'm going to go to some, this is red oxide. And with the Payne's Gray, makes like a pretty burnt sienna color if you mix them. One of the difference with the board and the, this is back to the Quinacridone Nickel Azo Gold, by the way, with the dirty brush. One of the differences between the boards and the canvas is that on these first couple layers, you do see more brush strokes because it's a little bit smoother. If that bothers you, you can always put some more gesso down on top of it. And you can buy these boards non-gessoed as well and do your own gesso on them. This is just the second layer of Quinacridone Nickel Azo Gold on here, darkening it up. And some more red oxide. Now I'm not thinking about anything. I'm just getting some paint on here. Let's do some raw umber. Now, when painting the cheesecloth, I want to get down in between the strings so that it doesn't get too visually busy. I want to make sure that I get paint on top of the cheesecloth as well as between the strings. I'll put some raw umber down here. I'm going to go to Tighten Buff because I like a lot of white. And it reads as white from a distance, but it's that little bit of yellow coloring to it helps it blend with these warm colors a little better. You want to find your balance between simplicity and complexity. So the cheesecloth is my complex area. It's busier. And this white, even the white with the cheesecloth on it, is my more simple area. And in general, what I've got up here, I want down here diagonally. I just want less of it, about a third, half to a third of the amount of that color. I happen to not like this color mixed with Titan Buffs. That's why I'm not blending there too much. This is called a quill brush. It comes in a couple different sizes. This one is 30. And I think it's the biggest one that the quills come in. It's a golden Taklon quill. I have for years just been using a 1-inch flat brush, and I just found that I like this one a little bit better because I don't like to be switching brushes. I'm just lazy. So this one I can use that little point to get in the corners where the flat brush I was having to turn the brush over a little bit to do that. So I didn't know that these existed, and I started working some with silver brush, and they sent me one, and I just was like kind of fell in love with it. It's not a golden brush. Golden doesn't brushes. Golden Taklon is the type of fiber. It's confusing because it has the word golden in it. So silver is the manufacturer, quill is the type of brush, and then golden Taklon is the fiber in the brush. So quill is the shape. It's not a round brush because these bristles are all different lengths. And it's the way the ferrule is built makes it a quill, the way the hair is attached, and it's longer hair than most round brushes. So I'm going to set this aside to dry for a few minutes. And I'm going to go back to this one here that has the tissue and the cheesecloth on it. And I'm going to put some light molding paste on this. Now, this I'm not going to be able to paint because the molding paste won't be dry. So maybe I'll put a little bit of paint on here first so you can kind of see how the tissue takes the paint differently from the cheesecloth. Okay, and as usual, I'm going to start with quinacridone nickel azo gold. It's a habit I've gotten into of doing underpaintings with the quinacridone nickel azo gold. So you can see some of the green coming through, and I kind of like that. And if that was white, I would really work to get paint down in there. But because it's a color, I'm okay with it here and there. And I'm going to put some yellow ochre in here too, because it's more opaque and it's going to cover up that green a little bit better. With the quinacridone, that was quinacridone nickel azo gold, that last brush stroke. With the quinacridone nickel azo gold and the cheesecloth, the way the cheesecloth grabs it, it becomes orange. And when I brush it out, it becomes more of a yellow color. And this is the red oxide, which I recently switched from quinacridone burnt orange to the red oxide because the red oxide mixes a little bit better with more colors. The burnt orange is very transparent. This is a little bit more opaque. Quinacridone gold is the original name of it, and Golden couldn't get that pigment anymore, so they mixed something comparable to it and called it the quinacridone nickel azo gold. In their watercolor line, they dropped the nickel azo and they call it quinacridone gold, but they're pretty close. The old quinacridone gold is earthier. It's more like it is when I add raw umber to this. This is, in my opinion, their quinacridone nickel azo gold is way oranger than the original quinacridone gold. And it seems like as time passes, it's getting more and more orange. They tell me no, but I've actually done tests with some old paint, and yes, it's gotten more orange. But they could be using the same formulas, but their manufacturer changed the formula or something. I don't know. The manufacturer of the pigment. See how nice those wrinkles are from the tissue? Every place you see the dark areas. So I don't have to worry so much about shading and depth because the tissue gives it to me automatically. This is yellow ochre here. So I'm coming up on the point of this as I'm coming out, and that is really helping the colors blend. Or I can come down hard and cover a bigger area. I should be working on the top of this as well. Get some Titan buff going up here, which is an opaque color, and cover up some of that green. I just really did not like that color green that I got on here somehow. In general, I like my paintings lighter at the top and darker at the bottom. It feels more natural. When you put darker at the top, it feels ominous, like a thunderstorm. So if that's the feeling you want, then definitely put your darker part at the top, because that's the kind of feeling people get from it. But if you want more of a sunshiny, happy feeling with your paintings, put your lighter area at the top. I'm going to need some of that white down here to balance that. And I'll put some yellow ochre up here. And a little bit of raw umber. Get some more raw umber going on the horizon line here and there. Okay, I'm gonna put that aside to dry for just a minute, and then I'll put some molding paste over the top of that. I'll put this up, I'll put this up close so you can kind of see. So this is coming through from the back up there, and there's always pieces of an old painting that come through, which I really like. They're not as pronounced in person as they are on the camera. But also cheesecloth, the cheesecloth has grabbed that red color a lot, but I'm using the yellow coming through the cheesecloth. If that were white, it would look really yucky. At least in my opinion, it would be yucky. Okay, now I can go back to this one. I want to get rid of this line here. So I'm blending in some yellow ochre. And I'll blend that with some Titan Buff. And I'm going to get some Titan Buff going down here to balance out the area up here. To perfectly reflect it, but it does need to be similar. And then I need more Payne's Gray up here. Should have rinsed my brush out before I do that. So this is really a complementary triad of colors, the Payne's Gray being my blue, the red oxide being my red, and the yellow ochre being the yellow. So I can make a lot of different colors out of these three colors. You see now this is why I like that brush. Before, when I'm covering big spaces, I'm pressing hard. Now I'm working on this little spot here, so I can use that nice little point that it comes to. And it still has a lot of bounce to it. One of the reasons I always like a golden tack-on fiber brush, even the cheap ones, they just always have the right amount of bounce for me. It's hard on camera to see the difference between the blue and the brown, but that's two different colors over there. And then I'm going to freshen up this Payne's Gray down here a little bit because it's got other colors in it. And I'm going to get down in there. I'm going to cover a bigger area, so I'm pushing harder on my brush now. Rinse the brush again. I like this white, but I don't like the whole corner being white. So I'm going to put some yellow ochre over the top of that white, over the top of some of this white, and make it a mix. And this is where the board not drying as quickly is to my advantage, because if this were canvas, that would already be dry. But on the board, it's still moist enough that it's going to mix here. And the fluids are a little bit slower to dry than if you're using the heavy body, which is what comes in a tube. Need some more yellow ochre. This is the yellow ochre fluid here. Need a little bit more of it on my palette. And at this stage, I am painting like the cheesecloth isn't even there. I have to have sort of, have to be aware of it without separating it from the rest of the painting. So that's why I went into it, but I didn't worry about covering up the whole shape. And the same here, I'm painting into the raw umber cheesecloth, but I'm not going to paint around the shape. That's how you get more floating islands. And then I want to put some more yellow ochre down here. That kind of needs to dry for a few minutes, but this can be brightened up, the yellow ochre in here. I'm going to freshen that up a little bit. Use a little less of that red too. I'm going to blend that line there. Get my color changed out of the middle. Okay, that's shaping up nicely. I'm gonna put it aside for a minute. Go back to this watercolor one and see what I can do with it. Kind of want to emphasize this Payne's gray and here a little bit. I don't want to go over it or I'll lose my texture, but this is what I'm calling a floating island here. So I'm going to pull some Payne's gray from there out to this edge. And over here. And knowing I was going to do this is why I put the Payne's gray into the background before as well. Blot that with my paper towel. Have to paint into that a little bit to make it look part of the rest of the painting. This is yellow ochre here. Okay, I'll put that aside. In the studio, I work pretty much this way. I'll have 2 or 3 or 4 things going. A lot of times, especially if I'm working smaller, 12 by 12 or smaller, this is 12 by 12 here, I'll have 4 of them set out when I start. And then I will eventually, I'll keep working on them like as one painting. And then eventually I'll see something appear in one and I'll emphasize that and finish it off. And then I'll go finish off the second one, etc. But I just keep going back and forth between several paintings. Otherwise I get too attached to areas or too attached to something. Now on top of the tissue, on top of the cheesecloth, I'm going to go ahead and put some light molding paste for even more texture on this painting. I'm going to put it kind of on the horizon and across the horizon. This is a stencil from stencilgirlproducts.com, designed by my friend up in Dayton, Trish McKinney. Light molding paste is more absorbent when it dries than your regular molding paste. And what that means is that it'll take wetter paint. It absorbs some of the paint, so you can even use watercolor at the top of it and you won't get any resistance. So I prefer it, again, so I can use watery, transparent paint rather than painting opaquely all the time. So I'm just going to take a palette knife and scoop some out, and I'm going to push it down into the stencil. And it takes a lot less than you think it would. Now you can mix color into this, but because it's a paste, it dries white. See, it's not a medium. It's not going to dry clear. It's a paste. So it dries white. So if I put any color into it, it's going to be a tint of the color and not the full color. I'm getting a little bit of color mixing here just because some of the paint is still a little tiny bit wet. And that's actually a plus. So I'm not going to concern myself with that. So I never use the whole stencil. I just use parts of it. So I'm going to come over here, and again, I don't want a floating shape, so these should sort of relate to each other. And this will not be able to be painted today, so this will take probably a good hour to dry. But I push it down into that stencil, and then I turn my knife on its side and I scrape. And that gives you a low, even texture on your painting. And this particular stencil is great because it sort of mimics the cheesecloth. I am going to stretch it out here a little bit and here a little bit so that those two shapes sort of reach in for each other. It actually doesn't look too bad just leaving it white. Down here, got some odd stuff kind of hanging on. I'm going to go ahead and scrape it off. Just looks a little bit too heavy for me. I kind of wanted it to just kind of flow off the edge. There'll be a little bit of texture there, but not as much as on the stencil. And I got some cheesecloth that I kind of scraped up here. I'm going to push it back down, and the molding paste will glue it down. So that's how you apply the molding paste. And I just wanted you to know that you can add texture on texture on texture, and it will all stick together and it will all work. Okay, so let's see if we can finish this. It's almost finished. On the camera, it looks really finished, and up without the camera, not so much. Oh, look at that water just lifted my paint. Oh, that's where the medium was on the board. So the medium can act as a resist. I'm gonna put some more Titan Buff out on my palette. And some more yellow ochre. Thinking I want this more blended. This is becoming a line in the middle of the painting. So I am going to put some more yellow ochre on it. And then I'm going to take the Titan Buff and I'm going to blend it out so that it's more of a blended area. Okay, that's better. It's not so much of a line. Doesn't look that much different on camera, but it looks different here. And I'm going to take some more yellow ochre up here. As I can't go any bigger than 11 by 14 on camera because I get off camera easy enough with this size. Yeah, now there's cheesecloth there, but it's well blended in, so you can just barely see where it starts. You have to be up to pretty close to the painting. And that's really what you want with your textures, is you don't want to be able to see them so much from across the room. You want your viewer to see them when they get up close. I'm going to put some raw umber up in this area. I'm not sure I want it, but I'm going to give it a try. I want something, but I'm not sure what. I love acrylics because you never have to be afraid to try something because you can always paint over it. Yeah, that helped. That toned that red down somewhat. I don't want so much of that there. The board, that extra little bit of drying time allows you to wipe stuff back as well. Let's see if I can fix this down here. And I'm just going to take this rag and blend it, my edges. And I want some more raw umber down in there. Just want to freshen that up. For years, I didn't use anything except the fluids. And lately, I've been using the tubes. The tubes you can't build up so transparently like this. I don't think I have a preference between one or the other. And I also intermix them. Like I still don't have all of the colors that I use in the tube. So like I don't have any Titan Buff in a tube. So I've been using it in the fluids. It's just a different feel. And I've just sort of learned to go with whatever I'm using. But I'm in the habit of building these transparent layers, particularly with texture. I definitely prefer the fluids when I'm painting with textures because I have to, otherwise I have to thin the tubes down quite a bit so they go down into the texture. And they've got a texture of their own and it makes a texture of its own. So you have to be careful then with your other textures. Well, I think that dude's about done. Maybe, maybe a little bit more yellow ochre up here. And blend it. I do a lot of blending with rags or paper towels, especially on the boards. So they're a little bit harder to blend on than the canvas. This is a nice blending brush though, and sometimes like you can really get a blended area just by doing this kind of thing with the brush. Oh, this corner down here is kind of This is a little muddy. I'm going to try to put some more Titan Buff over the top of it. Oh, and the cheesecloth looks really cool there because it's the Payne's Gray and Titan Buff have blended in with the cheesecloth. See how the cheesecloth has like a shadow around it now? That's because the Payne's Gray dyed the cheesecloth and the Titan Buff can't cover it up. Okay, I'm going to blend the yellow ochre in. It's a gradual evolution. I try not to visualize anything before I start painting because it frustrates me. If I want to visualize something, I'll do an abstraction where I'll start with a photo or a photo of something or a still life arrangement or something like that. And I'll work from that. But for my abstracts, for the most part, I just want to let them evolve. And it helps me to be talking to you or to be listening to a podcast or have the TV on or some music or something, to not get too involved with the painting and what it's doing. I just really try hard to work intuitively. I like in my studio at Essex, which is the name of the building, I have studio mates, and I like it when they're there and we're chit-chatting. I just did this whole big commission while I was chatting to my studio mates one day. We're not generally not all there at the same time, but it works out really well for me. So it takes my mind off of what I'm doing, and then it just happens, you know. It's a hard zone to get into, and my way of dealing with it is to have some distraction around. So I think this is finished, and I can't do anything more on the molding paste. So that's this one here. So I would paint this probably mostly yellow ochre because it needs to be sort of a quiet area because all of this texture here. And I'll go back to the watercolor for a minute and then so this needs some Titan Buff. Now the problem with this is what I mean about visualize something, is I don't want to lose that texture. But painting around it is tightening me up and I can't figure out what to do. So I'm just going to paint here and see what happens. Definitely needed some white. Okay, and then I'm going to blend that. And I'm just going to take the Payne's Gray and pull it out of here into there. That's starting to feel part of the painting again.